With that, again, a formal welcome to the second SentroConnect live webinar. Today's webinar is focused on a specific PAT application, here the use of the NIR in the tablet press. And we have two presentations, one to focus on the technical and the other on business considerations on the implementation of PAT in the tablet press feed frame. With that, I would ask the two presenters today to briefly introduce themselves. In that case, Owen, I would ask you, can you give a brief introduction about yourself?
Sure, Hubertus. Hi, I'm Owen Rehrauer. I'm the president of Centronic US Corp. I've been with the company since its inception in 2022. Prior to that, I was a Centronic global partner since about 2019.
Thank you, Owen. Second presenter today will be Uwe. Uwe, if you want to share a few words about yourself.
Yeah, hello everyone. I'm Uwe, co-founder of Centronic and with the company now for 32 years with a background of electrical engineering. Yeah, I'm happy to participate this time.
Perfect. Thank you, Uwe. My name is Hubertus Rehbaum. We see two more persons joined, at least on the panel, which is Sebastian and Adam. Both will be familiar for those of you who have worked and known Centronic for a while. They will be happy to support us at the question and answer session, which will be at the end of today. However, we will skip a brief introduction to get straight to the topic. The first topic today will be on the The first topic of today will be the technical considerations for the implementation. No, see, now I'm confused myself. The first presentation today will be on the business implications for the application of PAT in the tablet press feed frame. This is going to be presented by Owen, who has prepared that topic. With that, I would ask you, Owen, to go ahead, share your screen, and we are looking forward to your input. For those of you all attending, I would like to mention that questions will be answered at the end. So please, if you have any questions, don't hold them back. You will find in the meeting tool, in the webinar tool, a Q&A session, and we are looking forward to already get your questions. We'll collect them and we'll address them at the end of today. With that, Owen, you can get started.
Thanks, Hubertus. Can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Fantastic. Thanks for the introduction, and thank you for everyone who is attending. Today's discussion is going to be around the business case for NIR PAT in a tablet test feed frame. This is a multifaceted topic that would really take me quite a bit more time than we have available today to cover in a fulsome way. So I'm going to cover this at a very high level, although I will provide links to academic or industry articles that deal with this topic in more detail for the various areas we're going to discuss. In brief, we're going to be discussing what value PAT can add as a business case for enhancing manufacturing. We'll also discuss some of the cost and risk associated with implementing it and ways to evaluate whether or not using NIR PAT in a tablet test feed frame makes sense for your application. We'll go through some example business case studies where this has been done successfully, and then we'll have some time for some questions. Let's talk high level about what value PAT can add to a manufacturing organization. Well, we often, as PAT SMEs, will discuss technical advantages, technical capabilities, the ability to measure things like blend uniformity or content uniformity. I think it's worth taking a step back and talking about what benefits those provide to a business. These will be familiar to many of you, but these benefits can include reduce the overall cost of QC analysis, reducing inventory of product needed by an organization, improvement on yield, an enhanced process understanding, and some potential filing advantages, at least in the USA. By that, I mean if PAT enables you to declare your manufacturing operation advanced manufacturing, you can get some expedition in your filing for, again, a US filing. I do want to call special attention to the inventory savings, as this can be a non-obvious place where PAT can have a big advantage for an organization. I've listed a literature reference here where several brand name pharmaceutical companies have reported in 2009, 2010, billions of dollars in savings. I have a friend who is a high-level person at a brand name pharmaceutical company who likes to say, if you want to make the case for PAT, talk to your supply chain. You might find that PAT can have a larger impact there than you might see just from the analytical cost alone. I think that's worth keeping in mind when assessing the potential benefits or downsides of PAT. These are all the wonderful things PAT can do, though, although we should be clear-eyed when we discuss the potential cost and risk of PAT. There's some obvious cases here in general for PAT. There's a cost associated with the hardware, there's operational cost. PAT often requires specialized labor. If you need to calibrate or maintain a chemometric model, there's some material and labor cost associated with that. PAT can have maintenance cost itself. In addition, it also requires specialized data management to get PAT data out. Oftentimes, material or data management systems for a manufacturing floor are not designed to take in spectroscopic data, and we've seen several specialized solutions to management. This also has a cost, though. And last but not least, organizational comfort with a PAT approach. The pharmaceutical industry is a fairly conservative industry. We've been doing chromatography since the 1970s, and that's been a consistent way to get the manufacturing process filed with regulators. There are many business advantages of PAT. However, there can be some risk associated with that, particularly in terms of filing. Additionally, while there are certainly centers of excellence in Europe and America where there are lots of people who have special experience with PAT, we do have to acknowledge that in some areas of America, some parts of Europe, and the rest of the world, there may be some challenges getting specialized labor that can perform the sorts of work we need to be successful to implement PAT. There can be questions, particularly with some emerging PAT developers, on the overall business stability of the instrument provider. With Sentronic, we've been in business for over 30 years. We don't tend to get that question anymore, although Uwe can tell you in the early days of Sentronic, that was a question, and an understandable one. Last but not least, we should also keep in mind the impact of using PAT on the overall operational flexibility of the manufacturing process. If strategically it would make sense to hand a process over to a CMO, can a CMO implement a PAT strategy you have? It may be possible to enable that, but that may come with some additional costs, which we should keep in mind when we're trying to optimize our return on investment or overall business efficiency. That's a very high level discussion of PAT, but today we're interested more in discussing what we can do in an NIR feed frame. So what are the application cases for a PAT measurement in a feed frame? And what are the business advantages of using these methods? For starters, we can measure blend uniformity as an in-process control when we use NIR PAT in a feed frame, which allows us to catch deviations as they happen, potentially allow for them to be corrected, which can save a large amount of material or potentially save a batch or a continuous run. Sentronic has quite a bit of experience using this for continuous manufacturing or helping customers deploy this, excuse me, as part of a continuous manufacturing process. And we're seeing some emerging interest in also bringing this technique to batch manufacturing, which is fantastic to hear. Making measurements here can also enable an RTRT approach, particularly for content uniformity or dissolution. And I will say enable here rather than allow you to make it from the NIR alone, because oftentimes, almost always, the NIR data needs to be supplemented by other process information. In the case of content uniformity, this might be tablet weight, so we can assess the overall milligrams per unit dose provided to a patient, the variance there. And for dissolution, we may need additional information like tablet thickness or hardness. However, if we want to realize the benefits of the maximal reduction in inventory, move material through our process faster, this can be a big business add, although, as we'll discuss later, can also come with some larger costs and potential other ways we might implement this approach. We previously mentioned the potential filing benefits, and I should also mention this provides a tremendous amount of process information for us, which we can use to help ease process transfer from one site to another. These are all great, but we should also keep in mind the potential cost and risk when we're deciding whether or not we want to implement this method. NIR, as we previously mentioned, can include some non-trivial costs, particularly for a novel molecule. We may not have economized the actual manufacture of the drug substance. So as we're making blends of drug product, they can be quite expensive from a dollar per kilogram perspective. There can also be challenges with equipment availability. If we're talking about making measurements in the feed frame of a tablet press, is that tablet press always going to be available for us to do the method development we need to ensure the successful deployment of PAT? There are strategies one can employ to avoid this problem, namely the use of process simulators, but that is an additional cost we should keep in mind when we're assessing the overall cost and benefits. If we decide to use PAT in a method that would be classified as high criticality from an ICH perspective, there also may be some risk to the manufacturing uptime. To put this plainly, by this I mean if we use PAT in a way that we are making product quality decisions and that PAT goes down for whatever reason, there's an instrumental deviation or there's a model deviation, we may not be able to manufacture until that PAT is ready for use again. We should keep this in mind as we evaluate all this. There's lots of ways we can approach this problem, though, and I would say there is no one-size-fits-all solution. Having said that, we see three broad strategies of deploying NIR PAT in the feed frame, and I'd like to talk through the pros and cons of each of these strategies. I will say at the start, none of these strategies are something that you will implement and will never change or are immutable. Oftentimes, we see customers start with one strategy, for example, a very simple guardrail PAT approach, get some organizational comfort, progress on to an IPC, evaluate the potential pros and cons, and if it makes sense from a business perspective, go on to implement RT-RT. At a very high level, I would say it's important to consider the overall strategy of PAT deployment rather than just trying to deploy the PAT for a one-off situation and then not think about it again. So what do these strategies entail? One approach I will call guardrail PAT is something that I'm seeing customers who are interested in PAT but have a low organizational comfort with the method use to evaluate and get a feel for whether or not PAT is right for their business case. Oftentimes, this involves making PAT measurements for information only, so not making formal process decisions using the PAT, but using the PAT to catch potential large deviations from assumptions of manufacturing. For example, in a bin blending process, this might be making NIR measurements and using it to validate that all ingredients of a blend were put into the bin blending operation. If you can catch that and save a batch, the cost of that batch alone might make return on investment for the PAT. To describe what the graph on the left of the screen is trying to describe here, this is not from a real business case. This is going to be qualitative for the three strategies. This is a low cost in terms of dollar value relative to some of the other ways we might implement PAT, but the benefits have a lower ceiling than some of the other benefits we might realize for the business with other strategies. As we mentioned before, though, this might be a great way to start a PAT journey for an organization, particularly one that maybe is skeptical from previous deployments that did not hit return on investment. We also see customers using NIR PAT in the feed frame as an IPC. This has a greater development cost because we typically are calibrating chemometric models and using them to make process decisions. Those models need to be validated, and all of that comes with non-trivial cost. This also tends to be something that ends up in a filing. This can be an advantage. Getting additional time on a filing due to expedition can have a very large dollar value, particularly for branded manufacturing. We have seen this very often in continuous manufacturing as customers feel that they must include NIR PAT, and regulators encourage them pretty strongly, at least in the Americas and Europe, if they are using a continuous manufacturing approach. This can have an advantage depending on how this is deployed in terms of savings relative to laboratory methods or to the aforementioned patent savings. I will say we are seeing some emerging approaches here in how this is deployed to minimize the cost of the NIR method. Namely, we've seen publications from places like Pfizer, I put the reference on the screen here, where a fusion of NIR PAT data as well as soft sensor data is used to reduce the overall calibration burden of the NIR PAT method, and by that reducing costs, reducing time it takes to develop, to maintain an in-process control at a more cost-effective way. I would recommend, if you're interested in that, reading the attached paper to get a better idea of what the possibilities are, particularly in an advanced manufacturing, i.e., a situation where you have lots of other soft sensors over your development floor, to take a look at this. Last but not least, we do have several customers, several manufacturers in the environment using NIR PAT to enable a real-time release test approach. This has the greatest possible potential to realize ROI, although it does have larger upfront costs in terms of method development. We are seeing some companies start with an IPC approach, evaluating whether or not RTRT would be successful, or what the potential risk of using this method are, and then turning the key to enable it if it makes business sense. So how might one assess return on investment? I debated whether or not to include slides covering the math of net present value and internal rate of return. However, looking at the attendee list, it looked like we were not talking to a lot of business people. We tend to have more PAT SMEs. I will include some references here where the academic way of doing this is covered. And I would implore you, if you're interested in this, to take a look at those and see if there's some advantages. I'll cover those in a bit more detail in the following slides. In addition to what's covered in these references, though, I would keep in mind as you're evaluating this, whether or not you're going to be using a continuous manufacturing or batch approach. Oftentimes that's not included in these ROI calculations. What the regulatory readiness for a PAT filing, particularly if you're a potential manufacturer outside of the US or the EU. I know that not every region has regulators that are used to seeing as many PAT filings, so it may be worth having a discussion. Hearing from some customers, sometimes the regulators are quite excited for the potential of this. You may get some advantages there as well. Also keep in mind future use, readiness of CMOs for operational flexibility. Have some discussions internally to make sure that if you do go with the PAT approach, it's aligned with your overall organization's value and strategy for manufacturing. So talking through the case studies that we referenced here, there is a master's thesis out of the University of Lisbon, which did a great job demonstrating, at least for one case, the value of PAT, which was found to have a positive ROI. This was not a NIR PAT in the feed frame, but the overall process of assessing ROI, I think might be useful if you're interested in taking a look at this for your organization. UPRM out of the Romanok group also has a, in my opinion, very useful business case template for identifying key benefits and risk of PAT. Based upon a literature review, UPRM has been a center of excellence for PAT for some time. And if you're interested in this, I think this paper is worth a look as well. Last but not least, we found some German guy on the internet. Kidding. Dr. Rehbaum had a really wonderful case study in Technopharm. This was a case of using bin blending PAT. And what I think is useful here is it discusses some of the real cost, real risk, real complications of implementing PAT in a manufacturing floor, particularly around data management and orchestration of process materials. So if you're interested in this, I think this is a good sensible look at the potential benefits, but also real-world considerations needed for success of a PAT manufacturing approach. There is much more that I could say, although at this time, I'm going to hand the presentation over to Uwe Kirschner to talk a bit more about the technical considerations of NIR PAT in the feed frame. I'll be happy to take any questions on the business case. I should also say that we are always happy to talk to our customers or potential customers in person at conferences like the IFPAC conference coming up in March of 2026. I should also mention that we'll have a great opportunity to have these discussions at our Centronic PAT workshop in the US, September 14th to 16th, 2026 in Lambertville, New Jersey. You should be hearing more about that from us here, but I did want to make the announcement as we just booked that. With that, I will hand it back over to Hubertus.